Without any further ado, I give you Dr. Alan Stern.
Okay, so I'm going to talk. Good. We're going to talk about Golden Spike, give you a good idea of what we're doing. You can ask questions along the way. I've got about 40 minutes of material, and then I'll take questions again at the end. So first, I want to put this in a little bit of context. I know that most of you probably know all this, but just in case some people don't, the commercial space industry is really going viral in a lot of ways. There's a flowering, particularly of human commercial spaceflight operations. Different companies doing things ranging from suborbital, where there are 5 separate suborbital space lines: Armadillo Aerospace, Virgin Galactic, X-Core, Mast and Space Systems, and somebody will leave it out. Arlo. Somebody I'm still leaving out. Anyway, 5 suborbital space lines, and they're all very close to reaching operations. Space Adventures has been flying people up to the ISS with $30 to $50 million a pop, and you continue to buy tickets. The next up is Sarah Brightman and Bigelow Aerospace, based in Las Vegas, which wants to build private space stations on the logic that there are 18 nations involved in the space station, and that means that there are about 175 nations that are excluded, and they're going to rent out research space by the month on these modules. They just signed a deal to put their first research module actually on the ISS. Lunar is Golden Spike and Space Adventures. Space Adventures wants to fly people on figure-8 flights out to the moon and back, and our objective are human lunar landings expeditions. And then I'm sure you've heard about Inspiration Mars, which is probably the most audacious thing anybody is planning in the next few years. And it's an exciting time, and it's an exciting time to be in university and emerging into the workforce, I think, because there are going to be a lot more companies like this very soon. At Golden Spike, we've got a problem. It's your computer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem. This was built on a Mac, and all the slides are going to be hosted up. So, did you load both files? Did you load the PDF?
I did not do it.
Let's do it. Stand by for technical. So, this PDF on there, the same thing. It should translate a lot better. In fact, we can run it off that. There we go. Great, thanks. Okay, yeah, here we go. So Golden Spike's objective is really simple. We're putting together a system to fly human lunar expeditions, to recreate the capability of Apollo, to take nations and corporations to the moon. Maybe occasionally a space tourist, but these are very expensive. They're not expensive for nations and for science agencies. They're not expensive by the standards of space agencies around the world, but for an individual, they're going to be really tough to afford. And the way that we make our money is we sell the expeditions. So if Brad is from a foreign space agency and they would like to be in the business of lunar exploration, he can write me a check for an expedition, or a 3-pack, or a 6-pack of expeditions. The other way that we make money is that when we put the expeditions on, we put them on television. And we sell all the airtime, we sell all the swag that goes with it. We sell the naming rights, so it's going to be like NASCAR. We sell merchandising rights, all that. And it turns out, if you use a model like the Olympics, if you treat these like sports events, they're going to be big-time news on television in each nation that flies these, then you can really offset the price of these missions substantially. So even though we think they're already competitively priced, we can make them much more so. And I'll talk about that in some detail. As far as the team, and the team is very important, our company, I run the company. That little org chart shows who the officers of the company are. It's not everybody that's in the company by a long shot. And we have a board of directors, which is chaired by the fellow on the left. you seen Apollo 13, the movie? Big. You haven't? I'm sure you're in the right thought. So, if you remember Mission Control, and the guy that was leading Mission Control throughout the whole thing, the flight director, was Ed Harris, the actor. This guy, Jerry Griffin, had that job during Apollo. He was the lead flight director for 3 of the Apollo moon landings. There were 6. Before that, he was a flight controller in Mission Control. And after that, he rose in management and ran the entire Johnson Space Center in Houston during the shuttle program. After he retired, he was president of the Houston Chamber of Commerce. He's done a bunch of other things. He's really an incredible guy. He's the chairman of our board. And then you probably don't know any of the other people, like Doug Griffith, who's our general counsel, Jim French. Some of you may know an aerospace textbook by Griffin and French. It's a pretty standard textbook in most aerospace schools by Mike Griffin, who used to be the NASA administrator, and Jim French. This guy's a legendary rocket propulsion engineer. Max Vozoff was one of the first employees at SpaceX, did business development there. Now he does business development for Golden Swan. And Cindy Conrad, who's our treasurer, is actually here in the room. She's here in Boulder. She went to CU twice, once in physics and once for an MBA. And in between, worked at NASA headquarters and has done a bunch of other things. This is an eye chart, but it's there to remind me to tell you about some other people that are involved in Spike. We have a range of technical advisors, and we also have a board of advisors where people are officially attached to the company through board of advisor agreements. And what we've done is we've reached out beyond the technical expertise that the members of the company have to get other kinds of expertise that we don't have. So we've hired some people that are aerospace, and I'll just give you one example. Wayne Hale, who used to run the shuttle program for NASA, is on that list. We've reached out into media, and a good example would be Michael Bostic. Michael is the CEO of Walden Media. How many people here have seen Chronicles of Narnia? That's his company. You'll find other media people here. A good example would be Homer Hickam. How many people know who Homer Hickam is? Or you've seen October Sky, exactly. We reached out. We know we have to deal with the Washington regulatory environment. So we've got some politicians on our board of advisors. Some are Republicans, some are Democrats. It's always good to be able to go in both sides of the aisle. So maybe, how many people here have heard of Newt Gingrich on our board of advisors? You know he likes moon bases too. And how about Bill Richardson? Is that name familiar to you? Mm-hmm. So Bill and Newt both ran for president, but in different elections. Neither one won, which is a really good thing for us. Probably not as good, they would say. But Bill used to be the ambassador to the UN in the Clinton administration. He was also cabinet secretary, ran the Department of Energy. Later, he was the governor of Mexico. And where he got my interest was while he was governor of Mexico, he's the guy that got Spaceport America built, that did the whole financing deal for Branson, the launch base in Mexico. So he's crazy about commercial space, and he used to be a UN ambassador. We're going to sell these missions all around the world. And I'll tell you a story as an example of the kind of horsepower we have. I was on the phone with Gingrich one day, and he said, we have to go after Israel. Israel would love to have their people on the moon. Who do you know in Israel, Alan? And I said, well, I know 2 of the 3 former heads of the Israeli Space Agency. So I was feeling pretty good. And he said, great, I know Bibi. So I'll tell you what, we're going to get this done. And as soon as I told that story to Richardson, he said, wait a minute, why'd you call Newt? I know Bibi. So we've got some real horsepower in those guys. And there are a lot of other people on the board and on the board of advisors that really flesh out in all the areas from technical to political and regulatory to the media world to venture capital, some other examples as well, the kind of expertise that we need. And we've got some shuttle astronauts, people like that. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, I want you to get it straight in your head that we are not going to build anything. Neither does United Airlines. We're going to be the operator of flight systems like United Airlines. It buys their airplanes mostly from Boeing or from other manufacturers. We're going to buy all of our flight systems from existing manufacturers, from aerospace companies, and we're gonna operate them. So think of Golden Spike as United. Don't think of us as both, okay? So we're gonna run the flights, we're gonna choose the flight crews, we're gonna maintain the vehicles where necessary, but we're gonna buy all that. Now, the trick to everything we're doing is making the price low enough that there's a market. I know a lot of you know what Project Constellation was. She's smiling. When I was at NASA headquarters, I ran the science program. And so I had about 40% of the budget of NASA. Science mission director, it spends about $5.5 billion a year. And the guy down the hall ran the human spaceflight program, named Bill Gerstenmaier, and he had another about 40% of the agency. And Project Constellation chose a very interesting approach, and it turned out not to work. And it was, let's start with a clean sheet of paper. Let's design everything new, shiny, exactly what we need to get the job done. And build it with enough capability that it's extensible to go on and do a Mars program. The problem with that is it's extremely expensive. And by the time the thing was canceled, the cost to get to the first lunar landing was $150 billion and rising. And the Obama administration said, we just can't afford to do this. Every year it takes years longer. It's receding, and we're spending money on it. So they canceled it. When they canceled it, that was really the seeds of the company Golden Spike. Because I'm a big advocate of lunar exploration, and I'd already left NASA, and so I started making phone calls in 2010 to different companies and aerospace experts, saying, I'd like to see if we could do a private lunar return. I'd like to see if we could do it for single-digit billions, less than $10 billion. But I want to take a different approach. And I coined it the maximally pragmatic approach. The opposite, polar opposite of clean sheet of paper. It's what do we got that already exists that we can put together into a lunar transportation system? Let's not modify anything that doesn't need to be modified. And let's not build anything we can accomplish by modifying something that already exists. And I appointed Jeff Grayson, who runs X-Core Aerospace, who volunteered for the study to lead the technical team. About 20 people worked on that for a few months in 2010. And when the study finished, they came back with a very favorable answer. So I said, okay, let's get an independent review board together. And that's what we did. We got another dozen experts to come in who had not been drinking that bathwater. And we had a secret meeting. It's like science fiction. We had a secret meeting in Telluride, Colorado. And SpaceX was there, and ULA was there, Paragon, Southwest Research, a bunch of firms, some scientists, a couple of historians, some venture capital people, some space program experts, some independent reviewers. You never heard about this. Everybody kept it a secret. This was in August of 2010. And this independent review team couldn't find a hole in it. So when we emerged from that, we decided to form a company and to see if we could find a business model in which you could actually do this. And we had found a lunar architecture that, while admittedly kludgy, really inexpensive, we can get to first landing, including a flight test program, and including 30% standard aerospace reserves for between $7 and $8 billion. That's 20 times cheaper than Project Constellation. So imagine if a new car, let's say a new two-seater red sports car, dropped from $40,000 to $2,000. That's the kind of equivalent price reduction that we got, and we had it peer reviewed, and it's safe. And most of the are things you can buy today. So you can look up the price of an Atlas rocket. You can look up the price of a Falcon. They're offered on the commercial market. That's an example. We got quotes from SpaceX in writing, from ULA, etc. Here's how we do it. launch architecture. In Apollo, one launch, one very big rocket. We don't have that rocket, so we have to use some tricks. One trick is called orbital refueling, and the other trick is called 4 launches. Here's how it works. You can look at that, and I'm going to say it in words. So the first launch is an Atlas V. Guess what? It's not carrying anything. There's no spacecraft on top. The only thing it's carrying is a refueling kit. When an Atlas V launches, the upper stage, which is called the Centaur, usually reaches low Earth orbit about half full. And that's enough to do the mission. But we want to lift something heavier than a half full Centaur can do. So the first Atlas V launches, the only thing that it's carrying is more liquid oxygen and more liquid hydrogen. And as soon as it gets on orbit, it retanks itself, disposes of those now empty refueling tanks, and now we have a fully loaded Centaur sitting in LEO. 1 orbit later, a Falcon 9 comes out of the Cape, and it's carrying our lander, and nobody's in it. It does an automated rendezvous and docking, just like vehicles that go up to the ISS. It docks to the Centaur. The Centaur does its thing, and off the lander goes to the moon. And because I've reloaded the Centaur, it has the propulsive capability to put the lander into orbit around the moon, where it waits. It loiters. 28 days later, the moon comes around, same launch window. 1 month later, we're going to launch another salvo of 2 rockets. Atlas V flies out of the Cape. It's not carrying anything except the refueling kit. As soon as it gets to orbit, it refuels so that the Centaur is fully loaded. 1 orbit later, another Falcon 9 out of the Cape. This one's got a crew capsule and a crew, 2 people. They dock. The Centaur does its thing. 3.5 days later, they reach low lunar orbit, where they get rid of the Centaur and dock with the waiting lunar lander. And now, thanks to this trick of orbital refueling plus 4 launches, I've now assembled in low lunar orbit exactly what Apollo had. Equivalent of command service module, that's the capsule, which is going to take my crew back, and a lander. And then from there on out, it looks like an Apollo mission. They transfer to the lander. The 2 individuals on the crew go down to the surface. There's walking surface expeditions, multiple DVAs. They go back in the lander, up to orbit, transfer to the capsule, fire the engines, home, parachutes, and land on the Earth. Now the whole thing takes 6 weeks, because I had to launch the lander pair 4 weeks early. The whole thing takes 4 launches, a bunch of choreography, but it's dirt cheap. Now, $7 or $8 billion is the cost to get all that developed and tested. That's not the cost of an individual mission. We can fly these missions for prices of about $1.5 billion. That's what's really the breakthrough. This is just a little chart to show you the breakdown of the development cost versus the flight test cost. We have a really competent flight test program. Starts off in Earth orbit without people, proves out the refueling system. Then we send an unmanned capsule, just as it would normally, all the way out to the moon. Next flight, we send the human crew to the moon. Then we go and test our lander. It does automated landing, just like Mars Curiosity or any other science mission. We're planning on automated landings. And at the end, on the 5th mission, we get the first crew to the surface. But repeating those missions for a price of $1.5 billion is the key. At $1.5 billion, Golden Spike can afford to buy everything you need for your expedition, to pay back our development costs, and to make profits for our investors. Do the whole thing on $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion is about the cost of a modest scale flagship mission that we would fly in NASA for science purposes. It's like fairly expensive astronomy missions, for example, or planetary missions that the European Space Agency or JAXA flies today. That's the breakthrough here, is we can offer lunar expeditions with human beings at prices that space agencies are already paying to do robotic missions. How's that for awesome? And the capability that we offer in these lunar missions is substantial. By the way, this chart is just to remind me, to tell you, in addition to having a peer review panel, we wrote a paper. It's in Journal of Spacecraft and Rockets. It's available online. It's also at our website. And you can read all about this in a lot more detail. We sell the missions for $1.5 billion. If a country wants to buy an entire expedition, that's the price. If they can't afford it, they can just buy one seat. We'll match them up with some other country that only wants to buy one seat. Now the cost is $750 million. That's like a run-of-the-mill science mission. And if the media sales run a few $100 million, then your $750 million just went down to something like maybe $400 million net cost. Now you're talking, you're putting your person on the moon and doing sample return for costs that are like half the cost of a Landsat satellite. How's that for awesome with all capital letters? And we modeled all this, and it really works. We don't even need to find a billionaire to make this work. Now, if you know a billionaire that's real interested in this, we wouldn't turn him down. But we're going about this the same way that Boeing started a new airliner. The way that Boeing starts a new airliner is when they have their concept together, they start showing it off to respective airlines, to customers, and they take commitments on orders. And when they build a big enough book representing, say, half the development cost, they have signed contracts of intent to go forward. Then they go to the bank, they finance the rest of it. The bank says it's not very high risk because you've got all these orders. And without ever having to bring in magic billionaires, they start a new airliner. And that's exactly the way that this project is going to work. Because most current commercial spaceflight projects rely on an unsustainable model, which is first you find a billionaire that loves your idea. There are only so many billionaires that love space ideas, right? We want to actually show in Golden Spike that you can do this the normal aerospace way, where we will have investors, but they're only going to represent about 15% of the cost of getting the first landing. Most of this is going to be financed through the sales of expeditions and the sales of the media that goes with them. Who are our customers? Corporations, individuals. Those get a lot of attention in the press, but they're a tiny part of our market. If I had a pie chart here, you would hardly see that little sliver of pie that's anything except foreign nations. That's who we're aiming for. We've done a market study, and we think that there are between 20 and 30 nations that are interested in this, and that are spending this kind of money already on science missions in space. That's how we did the analysis. So we did pretty thorough analysis of the budgets of every country with a space agency, or every country that's extremely wealthy, like in the Gulf region. And depending on how you do that, you get 20 to 30 nations. Now, we think that that's probably worth more than 20 or 30 expeditions, because nations who are serious won't want to do a stunt. They won't want to buy one. They'll want to buy several expeditions, and we're like a lunar exploration program. I said earlier, we're going to sell 3-packs and 6-packs at a discount. And if you don't think that this is maybe so likely, that chart you can't read, I'm sorry, it's in yellow like that. That's a list of lunar missions flown since 2007. And on the right shows who's flew them. And I'll just read it off. Europe, Japan, India, China, India, United States, China, the United States, India, China, Russia, and now the Germans and others are also doing it. This represents several $1 billion in robotic missions to the moon, just in the last 6 years. That demonstrates that there is a market for lunar exploration for foreign space agencies. There's another good demonstration, and it probably took place before a lot of you were born. The Russians used to have space stations called Salyut and Mir. That's actually during the Soviet Union. And they used to sell expeditions to those space stations. Has anybody ever heard of that? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Easy. Okay. Raise your hand if you think you know how many expeditions they sold. many?
Well, I only know about
You
them,
do?
not the expeditions, but I'm thinking it's none because I didn't hear about it.
It's none because you didn't hear about it. Anybody want to venture a guess? How many expeditions did they sell? Nobody wants to guess? 10. Any other guesses? Huh?
None.
Turns out they sold 30. They sold 30 expeditions over about 15 years. And they sold them to countries like East Germany, Hungary. I'm just going to make some random examples. Malaysia, Cuba, Vietnam, France, England, Japan, Indonesia. There are a lot more. Now, there weren't 30 countries. France bought 6 missions. Japan bought 3. In England, they flew the world's first space tourist, a woman named Helen Sharman, selected through a contest in the 80s. Nobody remembers any of this, but you can find it all. It's history. They demonstrated not only that countries wanted to be a part of that kind of space program, but that they didn't care if they were first or second or 17th. They kept lining up because they wanted to join the club. They wanted to have an astronaut they could parade around who'd been up there, and this was a way to do it, to show that they were in the big leagues. And we're basically going to do the same thing, but with planetary exploration, using the moon as the nearest beachhead. The capability that we offer is like the early Apollo missions. This is the traverse route on Apollo 12. It's about a 2-kilometer traverse. There's where they landed. They walked over to Surveyor 3, which had been landed years before, unmanned. And we're going to offer very similar capabilities in that, like this picture in the lower right, we have the equivalent of the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package called ALSEP, so they can leave experiments behind that will operate for a long time to come. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And we can return samples, the same kinds of samples as in Apollo, about 50 kilograms per mission. A lot more if you leave one of the crew members behind. But a really tremendous capability. Essentially the capability of Apollo, but for prices that are dirt cheap. This is our development schedule. We're conducting something now called LAS. That's the Lunar Lander System Study. I'll tell you a little bit more about that and some of the results that are coming out of it. We're going to do an extension to LAS called LAS-2. Next year we'll start integrated system studies that will lead to a systems requirements review, and then the production of a request for proposals and RFP. We expect to select the rockets, the capsule, and the lander 2 years from now in early 2015. And then we'll begin test flights only 2.5 years later, in late 2017. If you ask how we can do it so fast, it's because most of the things we're buying exist. So the very first test flight will be that refueling kit. All I have to do is buy an Atlas. Anybody can buy an Atlas. You think, anybody can buy an Atlas. I actually bought an Atlas before, an Atlas V. It lofted New Horizons on the way to Pluto. PI'd the mission, and although I didn't literally write a check, I did pay $180 million out of my mission budget for that Atlas V. And our test flights will progress across 2018 and 2019, leading to landing. The last study consortium are these companies and entities. Space Florida is actually helping to fund it because they know there's a lot of business in it for Florida when we're launching 2 or 3 expeditions a year, and each one's 4 launches. Some of these companies you may not have heard of. They're smaller, 0 Point Frontiers, but they work for NASA, they work for Virgin Galactic. They're a dynamite little systems engineering company. Some of them are bigger, like Northrop Grumman. They're doing our lander design. They built the Apollo lunar lander. They're under contract with United Launch Alliance. Northrop Grumman, I said. Maston, you probably have heard of. They're experts in vertical takeoff, vertical landing. Southwest Research Institute, my day job, where we build a lot of scientific instrumentation. Southwest has been doing the study of the ALSEP equivalent, and I'll talk about the surface experiment package. We've had some nice breakthroughs as a result of these studies. Let me tell you about just 4 of them very briefly. We discovered a cheaper way to go to the moon, a simpler way than what I described before launch. uses the Falcon Heavy. Have you heard of that? This is the new SpaceX rocket. It's kind of half the power of a Saturn V. And it has enough performance to loft our lunar lander in one launch without any refueling. And to do the same with the capsule. So then you get rid of a lot of choreography, launching 4 things. You only have to launch 2 things. And it turns out there's a significant savings. We don't have to develop the refueling system. And because we're buying less rockets, the whole thing turns out to be less expensive. And our development cost to first landing drops from $7.5 billion to about $5.5 billion. And ULA wasn't very happy about that when we first came up with that option, because they thought they were at a real disadvantage at a higher price and much more complicated staging scenario for launches. So what they found is a way to upgrade the Atlas with a system called ACES, which is an advanced upper stage that can do it in 2 launches. What do you know? So now Elon's got some competition. Competition rocks, especially if you want to control prices. Northrop Grumman been doing our lander studies, and they validated all the work that we did and showed that there were literally dozens of different ways to do landers within our mass budget and cost budget. And most importantly, they showed that you could do it with storable propellants instead of very high performance propellants that use cryogens. Because remember, in all of our scenarios, the lander has to loiter in lunar orbit for a month. If we miss a launch window, 2 months. And you don't want that liquid hydrogen and oxygen because it can boil off. You have to control that, and it's expensive. You'd much rather have a solid propellant, storable, or something like hydrazine. And Grumman showed that that's entirely possible within our mass budget. I'll say a little bit more about that because they came up with a completely cool concept called Pumpkin, of all things, for a new type of lunar lander. Paragon has been working on designs for the EDA suits. Nobody has done a lunar EDA suit, which are very different from zero-G suits. Plus, they have to deal with different thermal conditions, and they have to deal with all that abrasive lunar dust. They passed their system requirements review, and they're now on into design. And at SWRI, we had a real breakthrough on how to make the surface experiment package work. I'll tell you about that. So I've just talked about these 2 launch. These are our available menu of ways to get to the moon inexpensively enough that you can run a business on it. The 4 launch option, that's option 1. This is the first thing we discovered. Then SpaceX offered us the Falcon Heavy launch, so we had a less expensive option. And now ULA claims that they can do it even less expensive than SpaceX using Atlas and ACES and something called Zeus for a landing system. And they make a pretty convincing case. Grumman has been studying all these different lander alternatives. We said they had to fit in that dotted box of parameter space, and you can see there are a lot of options that fit. There are a lot of options that didn't. But notice, see that X where it says Apollo 15 up there? So this axis along the abscissa is the mass of the lander, wet, when it starts off. You'll notice our landers have to be a lot lighter weight than Apollo. And turns out you can do that. Apollo, had pretty primitive technology. They had a computer that had less than 1/1000th the power of a tablet today. And it weighed 100 pounds. And they carried 40. So guess what? One iPad and I'm done. All the computing power I need, it doesn't weigh a thing. And all the avionics get a lot lighter weight. And we're not flying fuel cells, which are wet and have consumables. We're flying batteries, like Apollo, and solar arrays, because we're going to be loitering in lunar orbit, so we have to recharge a lot. And it turns out that when you work through all that, you can do it for a lot lower mass without having to invent new technologies. Now, I want to tell you about our ALCEP equivalent. Since we're Golden Spike, it's called the GoldCep. And the idea is that we're selling turnkey expeditions. Country buys it, they get to pick the crew, the landing site, the traverses they want to do, those kinds of things. We're going to provide them with everything else they need. Crew, the training, the mission operations, all of it. And we offer experiment packages too. Now, if they want to build their own, that's fine. But if they want one provided for them, if they don't have the technological base to do it, we can provide it, and they can pick the experiments off the shelf. An unmanned surface station that the crew would deploy, and which will then operate for a couple years and telemeter the data back home. The problem with the moon is that the lunar night lasts 2 weeks. It's a long time, it's very cold, and in the case of commercial aerospace like Golden Spike, you can't use the Apollo solution. The Apollo solution to that was to fly a nuclear generator full totally, and use that to run the system at night when you can't have solar arrays. But from a launch licensing standpoint, that's not really feasible for a private company to get all the launch clearances. And take it from a guy who launched one of those for New Horizons. It's very complicated. There are 46 federal agencies who are involved in the New Horizons launch, federal and state, because we had over a dozen in Florida. We had to get permission. So if you say, well, this isn't that hard, you just have a big battery. Problem is we only have 50 kilograms to throw at this problem. And when you compute the weight of the batteries that you need, that you can store enough energy to keep the thing warm to survive at night, it's nearly absolute zero. Literally, it's only 80 degrees Kelvin in the depths of the night. So you have to keep it warm. You compute the weight of the batteries, it's about as heavy as the batteries in a Chevy Volt, which is a lot more than 50 kilograms. That's the conundrum, is you can't make it survive at night. So what do? What you do is you think out of the box. You have to quit thinking of this problem as an independent experiment station. You have to realize that there's a resource right there where you landed. It's the descent stage. The descent stage of our lander is full of batteries used for the landing mission. So what we do is we plug into those. We deploy a solar array, and we recharge those every day. And we pull power out of them at night, but we don't have to pay for the mass of it because it's already book kept in the lander. That's the entirety of the breakthrough. It turns out there's some subsidiary benefits. One of them is that because the batteries are in this descent stage, there's a lot of thermal mass and they don't get as cold as they normally. So you don't have to store as much power to keep the batteries warm. And when we went to Grumman, we asked Grumman, could you accommodate this with your lander? They said, wait a minute. They ran out of the room and then they came back and they said, this is genius. If you will deploy the solar arrays on the first spacewalk, EDA, then we can actually recharge the batteries while we're on the ground, which means we need less batteries, which means we can save you some more mass to begin with. So it turns out, I'm skipping a couple slides, you've got this perfectly good lander. The solution is to plug into it. It's got what you need: structure, thermal mass, and batteries. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So a block diagram of that system, where most of it's in the lander, and only the experiments in the cables between the lander and the experiments are outside the vehicle. And it turns out it works. We went through the entire thermal design, closes on mass, as I will show you. This is a schematic of what it might look like. It's just a router hub out to 3 experiments. Everything else is just plugged back in the bird. And then there's a solar array, which pops out after the crew has left, and there's that blast of ascent, so it doesn't get covered in dust. And when you rack it up with the equipment list, it comes in under 50 kilograms. There it is, 49 kilograms. Oops. It's amazing. Now let me tell you about Pumpkin. This is really cool, and there's going to be a press release on this from Northrop Grumman. They had a similar kind of aha moment, which is, why would you need to take everything that you needed on the ground during the expedition to live? The galley, the potty, the living space, all that back up to orbit like Apollo did with a big ascent stage. It only takes 4 hours to get from liftoff to docking. Even in a pinch where you have some problems, it only takes twice that. So you really don't need so much infrastructure. So why not leave all that infrastructure behind and build this tiny little, almost fighter cockpit size ascent stage, which you only use for landing and takeoff. And when you're on the ground, you unscrew a hatch, you go down into the descent stage, and that's where your habitation volume is. It solves some other problems because you're leaving from the descent stage, the ladder is shorter. And the ladder was used as a big hazard backing down in lunar gravity, you know, falling 20 feet potentially. Now it's only 8 feet. Solves another problem. When you come in with all that dust, you track it inside the vehicle. Eventually you're going to launch, and it all floats up in zero G, gets in the electronics, gets in people's bodies, all that. This way, the descent stage is where you live and where you get dirty while you're on the ground. That ascent stage, you had a sealed hatch the whole time. And because it's gravity, all that dirt is going to be on the floor. It's not going to get up in the ascent stage, but you are. You're going to go home without that problem. So, Pumpkin, I wish I brought a picture of it. Sort of looks like a little Gemini capsule or a side-by-side fighter jet capsule. It's so small that it can be propelled to orbit by the reaction control thrusters used on landing. Just the attitude control thrusters, a few hundred pounds of thrust. And it is like sitting in a little smart car or something, right? Side by side, really cramped, but you're not there very long, and it really works. It saves an enormous amount of mass, and it gives you this great habitation volume for the time that you're on the ground. Solves that problem with the dirt, and we're pretty excited about it, so are they. I'm going to wrap this talk up now and answer questions. I want to say two things. One is we're hosting an international lunar science conference about Golden Spike expeditions, what kinds of experiments to carry, traverse planning, landing site selection, all that, in October at the Lunar and Planetary Institute in Houston. About 50 people have already signed up for that. The room is about 50% bigger than this room. If you have an interest, you should go to the website. You can just Google this meeting. It's October 3rd and 4th, and get on the list early. And talk to your professor and try and get a plane ticket. There are student rates. Secondly, the one thing that we've been doing in Golden Spike that I don't think has turned out very well is the thing I'm going to close on. We've been doing a Indiegogo campaign to judge public interest, and it's kind of fallen flat. We had a clever idea, maybe it wasn't so clever. Let's raise $1 for every mile on the way to the moon, $240,000, and see if people will pay that they're interested in lunar exploration. And I don't know if the target was too high, or people don't like what Golden Spike is doing, or nobody likes space programs at all, or we just didn't sell it. But the campaign ends in 7 days, and we're only 5% of the way to our target. It's not working. But maybe you can help. Get out there and you can help tweet about it. You can tell people. We'd be real interested in seeing a big pulse in the SEDS community around the country. If anybody wants to see lunar exploration, I would think it'd be people in SEDS. And I don't know how many people there are around the country that are in SEDS now, but my guess is it's a few thousand.
It's the largest student space organization in the world now.
How big is it?
Not really.
Well, I'm gonna guess we're
It's
about.
the largest, so you
It's a few thousand. Right? So if half the people in SEDS each gave $10, it would triple. And what we've already done in 5 days flat, it could be a SEDS movement. And you know what? Although we still wouldn't make our goal, our company doesn't depend upon this money to move forward. But it would show when we go out talking to bankers and things that a lot more people got involved in a campaign like that. And if any of you are interested, Brad's on our team and he can help you, or you can take the initiative yourself. You can find us on the web very easily. Unfortunately, this is a tiny URL, but if you just put in Indiegogo and Golden Spike, you'll find it in 5 seconds flat. And with that, I think I'll stop and take questions. Thank you. Anybody?
What's the biggest hurdle you still have to overcome?
In Apollo, the hurdles were all technological. 50 years ago, they didn't know if you could live in space. They didn't know how to do dockings. They didn't know how to do propulsion systems, avionics, any of it. For us,
selling their planes to airlines, there was a sustainable market because people wanted to transport from one place to another, and it kind of helped itself. How sustainable do you think this approach will be for those countries actually go and come back, and you don't? So it's kind of a mentality where like once you get there, once you have a person on moon, you get them back. You're happy, okay, we have a person from our country going there. But then they don't want to spend again for someone to go there, right? Like,
Well, let me counter that. You saw that list of robotic missions.
right, yeah.
India was on there 3 times. China's on there 4 times. The United States is on there 4 times. In Europe, they're on their second helping. So they are going back, spending similar kinds of money on robotic missions. You know, Steve Squires, do you guys know his name?
Yeah.
Steve runs the Opportunity and Spirit rovers, and Steve's a big aficionado of human spaceflight. And he says that his rovers do about as much work in 3 years as an Apollo expedition could do in 3 days.
That was a very controversial remark. Like that attracted a lot of controversy for him.
Yeah, it did. But you can imagine what we can do by putting a crew on the moon. The exploratory power of 2 people, 2 EVAs, surface experiment packages, 50 kilograms of sample is going to be unbelievable. Imagine what the worldwide scientific community, planetary community would do if we had 20 Apollo missions. If we could really go explore. It's going to be unbelievable. I'll take this one first.
How much of the profitability of the company relies upon the sales, sort of the side packages when you're mentioning media sales, all the merchandise and things like that? How much of the profitability relies on that type of sale versus just the sale of the mission itself?
That's all icing. It's all icing. What those sales do is they take the $1.5 billion and give you a revenue stream to offset it. Okay, at $1.5 billion, which is competitive with robotic missions, we've already got a marketplace. This just makes it better. Okay, he's next, then you in the back.
Okay,
Yeah.
so according to what you just said, that the incentive for the first few customers for Golden Spike would be to sort of recreate the history after what Neil Armstrong and the Apollo astronauts did. But from the point of view of a very critical customer, don't you think that countries might counter-argue that what America did in the 60s was based on their own capabilities, and this is like buying a 3-pack or a 6-pack, so this is more like a sale rather than an achievement for the country itself.
Yeah, I understand your argument, which is basically since we didn't build the flight system, it's not so much of an achievement. Right. I hear that argument a lot. But I notice that countries around the world, generally every country, maybe not every last country, but almost every country has a national airline. And very few of them build the airliners. They buy them from Boeing or Airbus or somebody else. And we think, and this is a bet, it's untested, we think that the achievement in these countries is to have their crew on the moon. And everything else in between is just getting there and back. And that will not be particularly important. If we're wrong, this business will fail. In the back.
So what's the potential of having more than 2 seats? You could have like 4.
You mean more than 2 people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the mass performance to do that with our Block 1 system. Now, there are options to grow this later, to have crews of 3 or 4, and to have longer stay times, even to bring rovers. There are options even to have an outpost where we build up more and more infrastructure at a single site. All that's coming, but you have to walk before you run. So this system can, with reserves, do 2 people, sample return, all that kind of thing, but it cannot get near 3 people. Yes.
Yes, if you scale up, would you be interested in orbital propellant depots? And related to that, how long could, if you put one flight in space with the liquid hydrogen oxygen, how long could you have it up there before the cryogenics boiled off?
So I'll answer your second question first, which is that ULA that's done the most work on this says they can make it last for months.
Okay.
Very little boil off. Would we use propellant depots or some other trick 10 years from now in a Block 2 system? I don't know. Let's see what's around in 10 years. The trick to Golden Spike in making this feasible really is that we're looking at what already out there. Because every time we have to invent something, it's schedule risk and it's all cost, right? I mean, think of the advantages of the system we have, not only for cost. When we fly, whether we fly Atlas or Falcon, by the time we're doing our first flights, Atlas has already flown 50 times. By 2017, it'll have flown 100 times. I don't have a new rocket, I've got a proven rocket. Same with Falcon. It's only flown a handful of times, but extrapolate out to 2017, they're going to deploy the entire Iridium constellation by then. They're going to be doing space station servicing 3 or 4 times a year. They've got other ComSec customers. There'll be several dozen flights in the program. Look at the capsules that are being built to go up the station. We're going to have so much heritage in this program that our customers don't have to rely on the kind of risk that they would incur if they built their own. Because it would all be test flights from the start. Brand new, unproven systems. So you come along and you fly with us, we've already made 10 landings or 20 landings. And we're using systems from the start that have a much deeper heritage than just what they're flying with Golden Spike.
How do we handle issues like, Challenger, Columbia, Apollo 1? Like, how will Golden Spike take responsibility or mitigate the losses?
Our goal is that these expeditions are going to be twice as safe as climbing Everest. We send that for hire all the time, and people get killed every year on Everest. And I'm going to make a little editorial here. We have to get used to loss of life in human spaceflight. Why is it that every airline in the world is allowed to have crashes and kill people in large numbers, but spaceflight is somehow not allowed to kill people even in small numbers? It's a dangerous business. That's actually, I think, part of the attraction, and we need to just get over it. Every airline CEO knows there's going to be a next accident. And they don't wring their hands about it. They simply try to reduce the risk to acceptable levels. And that's what we're going to do.
So you're not going to accept responsibility for it?
Oh no, if it's our fault, it's our fault. But all I'm saying is that if we fly dozens of expeditions, we'll probably lose some. I don't find that to be a problem. We'll find out if the customer base does. Obviously, if we're losing every third mission, nobody's going to buy, right? But if you're losing the occasional mission, you're flying dozens, we think that we can sustain that. We'll stick with the second row. Yep.
How are you going to handle political things like, based off right now, if North Korea were to come to you wanting a spot with the tensions?
It stands for Iran, North Korea, and a couple others. We're not going to talk about it.
Okay.
That's easy. Okay, there's about 190 nations that we can talk to, so that's just not going to, that's the second or third row. This guy again, and then we'll head backwards, and then we'll come back for a second.
Again, on sort of the business aspect, how much more capital investment do you need before you can start really getting the ball rolling in terms of testing out the equipment and purchasing those pieces of equipment that are already in existence?
So what we'll do is sell expeditions. When we sold 5, doesn't mean 5 countries, it might only be 1 country or 2 countries. So 5 expeditions, we have enough money to do the entire development, $7.5 billion. What we'll probably do by the time that we sold 3 or 4 expeditions is go to the bank for the difference and finish it off, and service it and keep selling more expeditions. The only investment that you're really going to see is going to be in the early phase, and it's going to be very small compared to billions. Anybody else over here? Okay, back in the back. Yeah.
Why is this idea so original? Why did nobody else think of it?
Because we're geniuses. I don't know. It wasn't that hard. Okay, we'll start with you, and then we'll go back up.
Alright, going back to your comment about accidents, I think we do have to, I agree with you, become, I guess, less uncomfortable with those. I would argue also that if it happens between your first, 3 to 5 missions, it could kill your company.
I agree. here is you got a crew cabin on top of a robotic lander.
A lot of the Apollo missions wouldn't even be able to fly with today's safety standards. And with all the space debris, are we prepared for any impact? Because I'm thinking of the old lunar landers, super thin.
If you actually do the math, there is a number you can calculate, but it's extremely low for the probability of an impact on any given spacecraft on any given day. And so it's just not a problem. Unless you're in orbit for a really long time, and it's only in LEO that there's a really bad issue. In our missions, we're into LEO and out of LEO in a few hours each mission. So there's essentially no danger, but there are standard tools around for collision analysis. They're used for every launch of every spacecraft launched from the Earth to orbit, where you actually know where all the debris is, bigger than a centimeter, and you compute your miss distance from all of it, and change your launch window if something's getting inside a bubble a few kilometers around your spacecraft. So we use those same standard tools.
And secondly, with the radiation, radiation flare that kills the whole crew of Apollo, what are you doing about, is that just sort of scheduling as well?
Well, it's a risk, because the flares can go off. They're very rare. There are generally a few lethal events every solar cycle, most of them at solar maximum. And they never occur except at solar maximum, or very near, in about a 3-year period, 3 out of every 11 years. And those events last a few days, and they occur only a few times. So if you work that out, there's a period of about 1,000 days of vulnerability, and your total vulnerability is integrated up around 1% of the time. So if you fly enough missions, particularly at solar max, you'll eventually get caught. And if you're on the far side of the moon, you're probably safe. Or if you're back in the Earth's magnetosphere, but if you're out in between the Earth and the moon, it could be lethal. And that's a risk of our missions. But we may find that we're not flying as many at solar maximum as other parts of the cycle to account for that, because we can't afford mass-wise to carry enough shielding to protect the crews. So that's still the problem on our plane. And maybe as simple as we only fly 8 out of every 11 years. And I hate to do that, but if that's what it takes, we can still run the business that way. Okay, your question?
Yeah. Does your business model include an assumption that ITAR will be changed in any aspect from here to 2020?
No, as soon as we're going to have to deal with it as a line item for attorneys. Literally. But ITAR is not, ITAR is not a showstopper any more than, I don't know how much you've dealt with it. I actually have dealt with it a lot. It's a pain in the butt, and it's a lot of paperwork, but generally you work through it. And a lot of these other commercial systems are already working through it. Bigelow's going to be flying space stations for countries all over the Earth. Branson's flying suborbital. He's got international customers. And you go down the list, and virtually every space company faces that problem sooner or later. Now, I'm hoping ITAR gets simpler. We don't have to deal with it to the extent you do today, but even today, it's a completely tractable system. And frankly, honestly, we already have hired ITAR experts. It's a Boston law firm called Wilson Storage. You can look them up. This is their specialty, and they're already under contract with us. Yes?
Based on your response to the question earlier about unsuccessful missions, if you will, I'm sure you anticipate maybe having to land early once in a while, something going wrong with that, or loss of life. How do you foresee that impacting the future of investments or customers?
Well, we think that a missed landing, for whatever reason, a flight that takes off and doesn't accomplish its objectives, brings a crew home safely, like Apollo 13, is acceptable, particularly if and we've included in our prices, the price of launch insurance and mission insurance. So if that crew has to go and fly again 4 months later to go through the expedition, like one shuttle crew did, in fact, they flew 4 months later and repeated the mission. We don't think that's going to really harm the business. It is complicated. It's aerospace. I think countries are going to recognize that. Yeah.
So when you went over your list of people who are members of your board of directors or board of advisors, some of the people there were pretty impressive names. I was wondering, how did you recruit those people onto your team? Were any people harder to persuade than others?
Good looks. approached somebody we didn't actually know. It was 0 degrees of separation. We went through somebody who knew them very well to make the introduction. But you know, with the kind of people that are on our board, we have some pretty good Rolodexes to start. Anybody else left over there? There's one down here. Yeah.
What kind of competition do you with the systems, most of the US has a lot of existing systems, and I think a lot of the competition could come from inside US more than outside of US.
So we think we know how to lock out competition and control costs at the same time in the United States. That is, we expect that the flight system providers who go under contract will be willing to sign an agreement which makes them an investor in the company, so they have a stake in our success. They don't have a very big stake to feel the pain when things are going right. And because of the contracts, kind of contracts that we've drafted, we're going to expect exclusivity. So if we buy Atlas, or we buy Falcon, we're going to lock them up for some number of years from any other human lunar expeditions. So then where would we get competition? The Chinese, they can start offering expeditions. And that would be serious competition if they're really doing lunar exploration. The Russians we don't take very seriously. I can see you don't either. My worst fear as far as a business, although it would be phenomenal as an American, would be for NASA to get back into the lunar exploration business. For NASA to just do what Golden Spike's doing, use existing flight systems and take the rest of the world to the moon. They completely put us out of business just by doing it. They're NASA. But at least under Obama, they're not talking about the moon. And they're not gonna until at least 2017 when we have a new president. So we'll see. We really don't think that we're gonna have domestic